Hey everyone, this is the No God. I'm Chiyo Natsu, charting the space between knowing and not knowing. Last time, our journey took us into the very heart of time, not the steady tick-tock of our clocks, but its potential genesis. We confronted the enigma of a foundational time scale, tau sub u, born from the universe's deepest dynamics, a time paradoxically racing towards zero, yet refusing to vanish entirely. Time where our entire cosmic history might compress into less than a fleeting moment relative to the source itself. This exploration, this confrontation with time's paradoxical origin, inevitably propels us towards an even deeper abyss, towards the ultimate question: what is that source? If time itself emerges, what is the timeless or temporal wellspring from which it flows? Where does the river of existence, with its strange currents and paradoxical heartbeat, truly begin? What reality precedes the first moment, the first differentiation? Humanity has long sought answers in familiar concepts. We've looked for a fundamental substance, primal matter fields, strings only to find ourselves asking, but what is that substance made of? Tumbling down an infinite regress. We've contemplated the void, absolute nothingness, yet struggled with the ancient dictum, ex nihilo nihil fit. How does the intricate tapestry of reality erupt spontaneously from utter absence? We've sought refuge in timeless, mathematical laws or abstract structures, marveling at their descriptive power, yet puzzling over their ontological status. How do equations breathe fire into existence? Our conventional maps seem to fray at the edges of this ultimate territory, leaving the origin itself shrouded in mystery, demanding unexplained first causes, or accepting foundational brute facts. Today, we embark on a more radical exploration. We venture directly into that conceptual wellspring, the hypothesized ground zero of reality as envisioned by the ground state information self-organizing model. Guided by GSISOM, we will formally introduce and dissect the proposed ultimate foundation, NP0 equals zero. Our central argument will be that NP0 equals zero is not found within our familiar categories. It is not a thing, not a void, not a static law imposed upon reality. It is, we propose, something fundamentally different, a self-contained, generative, paradoxical principle, the very logic, perhaps, from which all things, voids, and laws emerge. To approach NP0 equals zero, we must first consciously set aside our ingrained ontological habits. We must resist the urge to ask what it is, in the sense of identifying it with a known substance or entity. GSISOM posits that NP0 equals zero fundamentally defies these conventional categories. It is not a physical object, however small or fundamental. It occupies no pre-existing space, for space itself is considered an emergent property derived from it. It is not emptiness in the sense of a passive void, but something intrinsically active and potential-laden. And critically, it is not a pre-written set of laws governing reality from the outside. Rather, it is the very principle from which the possibility of lawfulness itself originates. So, if not a thing, what is it? Proposes NP0 equals zero as a principle, more specifically a self-contained, generative paradoxical principle. Let's break that down. It is self-contained, meaning self-grounding. This is perhaps its most crucial attribute in addressing the origin question. NP0 equals zero depends on nothing prior to itself. It requires no external cause, no embedding space, and no pre-existing rules for its existence or nature. It is its own foundation. This intrinsic self-grounding aims to resolve the infinite regress problem that plagues substance-based ontologies. Within the conceptual framework of GSISOM, NP0 equals zero represents the ultimate point of explanatory termination, the answer to the final why. That is simply because that is the fundamental principle from which why itself becomes possible. Thinking of it as a principle shifts our focus from static properties to inherent potential and operational logic. NP0 equals zero doesn't have structure. It embodies the principle from which all structure can potentially emerge. It doesn't follow laws. It is the principle that contains the implicit capacity for order, consistency, and self-organization that makes a coherent law-governed universe possible. It is the primordial or logos, the unwritten grammar underlying all cosmic sentences, the seed containing the DNA for every possible emergent rule. Rather than being merely a static state obeying external commands, The heart of this principle, its defining essence, lies in its intrinsic paradox. We conceptualize this paradox using the formula derived from deeper analysis within GSISOMs, and P0 equals 0 is equivalent to static 0 plus dynamic 0. Let's carefully unpack these terms. Static 0. 0 equals 0 aspect means absolute informational simplicity. This term points towards a state conceptually prior to any determination. Imagine absolute absence, not of existence, but of structure. No dimensions, no geometry, no differentiation. It is informationally ground zero, containing no actualized distinctions, only latent potentiality. It is pre-temporal, existing outside the flow of emergent time. This is the ultimate emptiness, but not a void, rather, the boundless conceptual space of pure potentiality, the infinite symmetry that enables all forms precisely because it possesses none itself. It is the pristine silence before the first sound. Dynamic zero, the empty set absolute potential and drive aspect, represents infinite generative potential. Inseparably fused with this absolute simplicity is its seemingly contradictory counterpart, an infinite, unbounded capacity for generation. This is not just passive potential waiting to be acted upon. GSISOM posits that this potentiality carries an intrinsic instability, an inherent atemporal drive towards differentiation and becoming. This dynamism is hypothesized to arise from the core paradoxical tension itself. It is the inherent restlessness within the stillness, the infinite creative energy coiled within the heart of simplicity demanding expression. It is the potential sound within the silence. The plus sign here signifies a paradoxical unification. Static zero and dynamic zero are not two separate components somehow brought together. They are fundamentally inseparable, mutually constitutive aspects of the single, unified reality that is NP0 equals 0. The simplicity enables the infinite potential. The infinite potential necessitates dynamism within the simplicity. Their irresolvable yet generative tension is the principle itself, and P0 equals 0 is the point where absolute absence and infinite potential meet and become one, not in static contradiction, but in a state pregnant with the possibility of all existence. We have defined NP0 equals 0 as this profound, paradoxical union of absolute simplicity, static 0, and infinite generative drive, dynamic 0. In the landscape of classical thought, such a unification appears as a contradiction, a logical impossibility, an error to be resolved or eliminated. If something is absolute absence, how can it simultaneously be infinite potential? If it is perfectly simple, how can it contain the drive for complexity? GSISOM proposes a radical inversion of this perspective. The paradox is not the problem, so the paradox is the solution. It is not a flaw in the foundation, but the very fuel for the cosmic engine. The irresolvable tension inherent in holding static zero and dynamic zero together is posited not as inert contradiction, but as the ultimate source of generativity, a foundation that was perfectly simple and static, lacking the internal dynamism, would likely remain just that simple, static, inert. A foundation that was pure, unconstrained dynamism, lacking the grounding in simplicity, might dissipate into featureless chaos. It is precisely the paradoxical union of these opposites, the inherent instability born from their coexistence, that provides the necessary impetus for a universe like ours, a universe capable of generating structured complexity from a simple origin to come into being. Paradox is not the barrier, it is the wellspring. This generative power finds its operational expression in a principle we've encountered before. The principle of generative non-identity, and P0 equals 0 is not equal to and P0 equals 0. This equation, again, is not merely symbolic logic. It signifies a fundamental ontological condition arising directly from the core paradox impossibility of stasis. Because and P0 equals 0 intrinsically holds the restless dynamic 0 within its static 0 simplicity, it cannot remain identical to itself over any conceptual moment, so even pre-temporally. The internal tension demands differentiation, operational consequence. The not equals symbol captures this necessary self-othering, and P0 equals 0 must, by its very nature, become different from itself. This is not a choice or an event caused by something external. It is the intrinsic mode of being for a paradoxical foundation. The roles revisited, this principle acts as the breaker of primordial symmetry. It shatters the perfect homogeneity of our static 0. initiating the first distinction, the intrinsic first mover. It provides the universe's endogenous engine, the perpetual drive for becoming, the source of all difference. It is the origin point of information itself, the primordial act from which all subsequent complexity, structure, and evolution unfold. The not equals symbol is the cosmic commander, let there be difference, while the not equals principle provides the fundamental why of generation's intrinsic instability. GSISOM conceptually sketches the how through mechanisms like self, reference SR, and a generative function gamma. It's crucial to understand these are conceptual placeholders for profoundly deep dynamics. Self-reference SR as trigger activation. How does the latent dynamic zero potential get actualized? SR of NP0 equals 0 is proposed as a possible conceptual trigger. Imagine the principle in its unified state, somehow interacting with or reflecting upon its own paradoxical nature. This intrinsic self relation could be the spark that ignites the not equals drive, forcing the transition from pure potentiality to the first inkling of actuality. We've previously symbolized this first activated state, this singular event of becoming, through a symbolic analogy, the factorial of NPU0 equals 0 yielding on, representing the irreducible uniqueness of the first step away from undifferentiated unity. Generative function gamma as ongoing process. Following this initial activation, the universe's unfolding is conceptually governed by gamma. This represents the emergence of the rules or logic as perhaps the paradox logic itself, by which one state generates the next. Critically, gamma is continuously influenced by the foundational not equals principle and is thought to incorporate element of intrinsic indeterminacy as epsilon, reflecting the interplay of potentiality and actuality, ensuring novelty and preventing deterministic rigidity. Gamma is the ongoing process of the paradox dynamically resolving itself through creative unfolding. The crucial takeaway here is the proposed inevitability of generation within the GSISOM framework. Given a foundation defined by the paradoxical union of static zero and dynamic zero, and governed operationally by the principle of generative non-identity not equals, the emergence of a dynamic, evolving reality is not a contingent accident or an improbable event. It is presented as the necessary, logical consequence of the foundational principle itself. The paradox cannot remain dormant. Its internal tension demands release through the act of creation. The universe unfolds because the alternative, absolute, inert stasis, is rendered ontologically impossible by the very nature of its paradoxical source. Accepting NP0 equals 0, this self-contained generative paradoxical principle as the ultimate ground of reality necessitates a fundamental shift in our ontological perspective. If the origin is not matter, or not void, not static law, but rather a principle governing the potential and dynamics of information itself, then the consequences ripple through our entire understanding of what is. Information takes center stage. GSISOM proposes an information-centric universe. At the deepest level, reality is constituted not by physical substance in the traditional sense, but by information, understood broadly as difference, relation pattern, structure, and the potential for meaning. The static zero is informational simplicity. The dynamic zero is informational potential. The generative non-identity not equals initiates the creation of informational distinctions. Everything that emerges, space-time, matter, energy, laws, consciousness is ultimately a configuration or process within this fundamental informational substrate. Process over substance of being is becoming. Because the foundation MP0 equals 0 is inherently dynamic errata via the not equals principle, the reality emerging from it must be fundamentally process-based. Existence is not primarily about static states or enduring substance, it is about becoming, unfolding, transforming. As we explored with the path is reality concept, and entity is its trajectory, its history of interactions, its ongoing dynamic maintenance as POBO. Stable objects are recognized not as fundamental entities, but as persistent patterns or stabilized processes within the universal flow. The core ontological commitment shifts from what things are to how things become and persist. This information-centric process-based view has profound implications for the status of the physical world we experience. The emergent nature of PSCR, physical space, a PS with its familiar dimensions and geometry, and the static existence resource SERs that populated applied particles, atom macroscopic objects, are not the fundamental bedrock of reality. They are emergent structures. They arise secondarily from the self-organizing dynamics of the underlying informational processes occurring within the foundational reality, conceptually VES originating from NP0 equals 0. Challenging materialism. This directly challenges traditional materialism or physicalism, which assumes that physical matter, energy, and space-time are the ultimate constituents of reality. In the GSISOM view, physicality is derivative. It's a specific, stabilized pattern of information that has emerged under particular conditions. It's akin to the patterns appearing on a computer screen, PSCSCR emerging from the underlying computations and hardware logic, VSK-DSK, and P0 equals 0. The hardware of the cosmos itself emerges from the software of the foundational informational principle. Dynamic grounding of stability. Even the perceived stability of physical objects is dynamically grounded. Their persistence relies on the ongoing AS dynamics and the continuous performance of SPOW, ultimately sustained by the foundational not equals drive. Physical stability is a hard won, dynamically maintained equilibrium, not an inherent property of static substance. What about the laws of physics? Are they eternal decrees governing the universe? GSISOM suggests otherwise laws as emergent regularities. Physical laws. Newton's laws. Maxwell's equations, the principles of quantum mechanics and relativity, are also viewed as emergent regularities or habits. They are not imposed from outside reality, but crystallize from the self-organization process itself. They represent the stable, recurring patterns of interaction and transformation that emerge and become reliable within the specific framework of our physical space, PS, contingency and context dependence. Because they are emergent, physical laws might be contingent upon the specific evolutionary path our universe took and the conditions prevailing within our PS. They might not be universal across all possible realities emerging from NP0 equals 0, and their form or applicability might even change under extreme conditions e.g. near the Big Bang or inside black holes, closer to the NP0 equals 0 source, reflection of deeper principles. While emergent, these laws are not arbitrary. They reflect the deeper operational logic inherent in NP0 equals 0 and the principles governing its unfolding, like the balance potentially captured by Euler's identity. They are the rules of the emergent game, constrained by the fundamental constitution of the game source. In summary, grounding reality in the generative paradox and P0 equals 0 leads to an ontology where information and process are primary. The physical world, with its matter, energy, space-time, and laws, is understood as a complex, dynamic, and ultimately derivative structure, emerging from and continuously sustained by the ceaseless becoming initiated at the paradoxical foundation. This sets a radically different stage for understanding not only the cosmos, but also how we come to know it. If the physical reality we inhabit, PSCR is an emergent structure derived from a deeper, potentially pre-spatial, pre-temporal, and paradoxical foundation, and P0 equals 0. This carries profound consequences for how we can know reality for epistemology. Our primary tools for scientific knowledge are empirical observation and experimentation, but these tools operate within the emergent framework of physical space, relying on interactions mediated by physical carriers like photons, governed by PPS, and interpreted through our senses and instruments, which are themselves complex CRs. This immediately implies a fundamental limitation, and P0 equals 0, the proposed ultimate ground, lies intrinsically beyond the reach of direct empirical verification. We cannot build a telescope to see, and P0 equals 0. We cannot design an experiment within PS to directly measure its paradoxical properties. It exists conceptually before or beneath the very space-time and observational framework required for empirical science to operate. Therefore, knowledge concerning the foundational principle itself cannot be purely empirical. It must rely on different modes of justification inference to the best explanation. We infer the likely nature of the foundation by observing its emergent consequences, the structure and dynamics of PS, the existence of anomalies, the nature of physical laws, and asking what kind of origin could plausibly give rise to the reality we experience. GSISOM with NP0 equals 0 is proposed as such an inference. theoretical coherence, the validity of the proposed foundation is judged by its internal consistency within its own potential paradox logic and its ability to provide a coherent, unifying framework for diverse phenomena from cosmic origins to quantum mechanics to consciousness, explanatory power. Its strength lies in its capacity to potentially resolve long, sedanding puzzles as like the origin problem, the emergence of complexity, the nature of time that challenge conventional frameworks. Knowledge of the foundation, therefore, shifts from direct observation towards theoretical modeling, philosophical reasoning, and the evaluation of explanatory scope and coherence. Empiricism remains crucial for understanding the emergent reality, PSECR, but an intellectualism suggests it has inherent boundaries when probing the ultimate source. A key epistemological consequence of positing a paradoxical foundation is the necessary re-evaluation of paradox itself within our knowledge systems. As argued previously, encountering paradox when attempting to describe the foundation or phenomena close to might not signify an error in our reasoning or a temporary limit of our current theories that will eventually be resolved by classical logic. Instead, it might be a genuine reflection of the foundation's intrinsic nature. Paradox as signal, not noise. And intellectualism encourages us to view persistent paradoxes as in quantum foundations cosmology. Consciousness studies not as noise to be filtered out, but as potentially valuable signals indicating the limits of our current descriptive frameworks, MCL, and hinting at the non-classical nature of the underlying reality. Need for paradox tolerance. True understanding, within this context, may require developing paradox tolerance, the cognitive and philosophical capacity to hold seemingly contradictory concepts in tension without demanding immediate, simplistic resolution. It involves recognizing that reality might be richer and stranger than our classical logic, forged in the SER world, can fully accommodate. Indirect proof of foundation. As speculated, the very fact that our most rigorous intellectual tools falter and generate paradox, when applied to the foundation, could be interpreted as an indirect form of self-proof of that foundation's paradoxical essence. The limits of the map reveal the challenging nature of the territory. Finally, the emergent nature of reality from P0 equals 0 organized through process like Ishimo into layers, vs DES leading to PSSER, potentially with further substructure like the ladder of paradox, demands a hierarchical approach to understanding context-dependent laws and properties, rules, properties, and even concepts that are valid and effective at one level of emergence, e.g., classical mechanics in macroscopic PSE may not apply or may need significant modification at other levels, EOG, quantum mechanics at the micro level, or the hypothesized paradox logic at the foundation. Avoiding category errors. Comprehension requires carefully distinguishing between levels and avoiding inappropriate extrapolation of concepts or laws across ontological boundaries, e.g., applying SER logic directly to DES, tracing emergence. True understanding involves not just analyzing phenomena at a single level, but tracing their emergent lineage back towards the foundational principle. Understanding how properties and constraints arise and transform across the hierarchy, epistemology in a GSISOM universe becomes intrinsically tied to ontology. How we know is inseparable from what reality is at its different emergent levels. It requires acknowledging the limits of our empirical reach concerning the foundation, embracing the potential centrality of paradox, and adopting a hierarchical perspective sensitive to the context, dependence of laws and concepts. Having established P0 equals 0 as the paradoxical foundation and explore the implications for our understanding of reality and knowledge, we can now explicitly connect this source back to the enigma of time we began with, the peculiar liminal nature of foundational time, simultaneously tending towards zero yet strictly non-zero, finds its natural ontological grounding precisely within the paradoxical structure of NP 0 equals 0. It inherits the duality. Tau sub u is proposed as the direct temporal signature of the NP 0 equals 0 paradox itself. It inherits the tension between the static zero and dynamic zero aspects. The tendency towards zero duration reflects the influence of static zero, absolute simplicity, pre-structural homogeneity, the potential for near-instantaneous actualization arising from unbounded potential operating without pre-existing constraints, It points towards the transcendence of conventional temporal duration inherent in the source's simplicity. The insistence on being non-zero reflects the influence of dynamic zero and the generative non-identity principle I not equals process becoming differentiation. These inherently require a minimal, non-zero duration. However infinitesimal, existence cannot arise from absolute static nullity. It requires the irreducible tick of becoming. Tau sub u embodies this minimal quantum of process time. Therefore, time, in its most fundamental form as tau sub u, emerges not as a smooth flow from a simple origin, but as a paradoxical state born directly from the paradoxical nature of the source. Its strange properties are not anomalies, but necessary consequences of a universe originating from the unified tension of NP0 equals 0. The perplexing nature of time's beginning is a direct echo of the perplexing nature of reality's beginning. Beyond time, the very possibility of a coherent, structured universe emerging from a paradoxical source demands an explanation for its underlying balance and self-consistency. How does a foundation seemingly built on contradiction give rise to a cosmos exhibiting profound mathematical harmony and operational stability, at least within the emergent PSKCR framework? Euler's identity offers a compelling candidate for representing the intrinsic mathematical self-consistency of the NP0 equals 0 paradox itself, interpreting E as the generative metric, pi as the structural balancing parameter, I as the transformative interface, 1 as initial unity, and 0 as perfect balance. The identity suggests that the paradoxical foundation possesses its own deep, inherent mathematical order. This foundational mathematical harmony is potentially crucial. It provides the underlying coherence that prevents the generative drive, dynamic zero, from leading to unbounded chaos and the structuring potential aus pi static zero from enforcing inner stasis. The perfect balance OS equals 0 inherent in the relationship between these core principles within NP0 equals 0 creates the stable, yet potent ground from which ordered emergence are driven by Ast by Asimov can reliably unfold. Thus, NP0 equals 0 is presented not just as paradox, but as coherent paradox. Its internal tensions are perfectly balanced according to a profound mathematical logic, potentially exemplified by Euler's identity. This inherent coherence provides the ultimate explanation for why a universe born from paradox can nevertheless exhibit stable structures, consistent laws, and the very possibility of mathematical description. The mathematical beauty we discover in the cosmos might be a direct reflection of the mathematical harmony residing at its paradoxical heart. In conclusion, NP0 equals 0, the generative paradoxical principle, serves not only as the source of cosmic dynamism, but also as the ultimate root grounding the peculiar nature of foundational time S tau sub u and the profound mathematical balance as potentially captured by Euler's identity that enables the emergence of a stable, structured yet ever-evolving universe. It is the paradoxical wellspring from which both the river of time and the architecture of cosmic order flow. So our journey concludes where it began, but perhaps with a transformed understanding, we have ventured conceptually to the very edge of existence, confronting the proposed ultimate ground of reality within the GSISOM framework NP0 equals 0. We have defined it not as a simple entity, but as a profound, self-contained principle. Its essence lies in an irreducible generative paradox, the inseparable unification of static zero, representing absolute informational simplicity, and the potential for structure, and a dynamic zero, representing infinite generative potential and an intrinsic drive towards becoming. This paradox is not a logical error, but the very engine of creation, operating through the principle of generative non-identity. NP0 equals 0 is not equal to NP0 equals 0. It necessitates the emergence of a dynamic information-centric process-based reality where physicality itself are a matter, energy. Space-time is a derivative structure, a CRPSN arising from this foundational informational unfolding. Crucially, this understanding forces us to acknowledge the inherent limits of our knowledge as epistemology, and P0 equals 0 lies beyond direct empirical grasp, demanding inference and theoretical coherence. It challenges our classical logic, suggesting that embracing paradox might be essential for comprehending the foundation. Furthermore, This paradoxical source serves as the ultimate root, explaining both the peculiar nature of foundational times to sub U and the profound mathematical balance C potentially exemplified by Euler's identity that underpins the coherent emergence of cosmic order. What does it mean to live in a universe potentially grounded in such a principle? The implications resonate deeply with the ethos explored throughout this channel, and P0 equals 0 is the source of the question, not the final answer. Recognizing and P0 equals 0 does not provide the comfort of absolute certainty or a simple final explanation. It is not a God in the traditional sense, offering purpose or definitive answers. Instead, its paradoxical nature makes it the ultimate source of the question, the boundless mystery that fuels our ceaseless quest for understanding, forever inviting exploration precisely because it resists complete comprehension. Validation of the an intellectualist stance. This understanding powerfully validates the an intellectualist perspective, acknowledging the inherent limits of our emergent SDR-based intellect as MCLs. When facing this paradoxical foundation is not an admission of failure, but a necessary step towards genuine wisdom as meta, framework awareness. It is knowing the boundaries of our map, existence within paradox. If NP0 equals 0 is the source, then our existence as emergent echoes of that source unfolds within its paradoxical influence. The tensions we experience between stability and change, order and chaos, freedom and constraint, knowing and unknowing are not flaws to be eliminated, but potentially intrinsic features of reality, reflecting the foundational paradox itself. We are children of paradox. Can a paradoxical principle truly provide a stable ground for reality? Doesn't paradox imply instability, incoherence? GSISOM argues counterintuitively yes. The stability we observe as in physical laws arises precisely because of the foundation's nature. Now its inherent dynamism not equals necessitates emergence. Its potential for profound balance, e.g. Euler's identity, enables that emergence to be ordered and self-consistent is within the emergent frame. The stability is functional and generative, not static. It is the stability of a perfectly balanced spinning top whose stillness arises from intense internal motion, rather than the stability of an inert rock. Our ground, therefore, may not lie in finding absolute, static certainty, but in learning to navigate the dynamic balance itself. It is finding stability within the process, embracing the interplay of structure and flux. See knowing and unknowing as the very nature of our existence. We have journeyed to the conceptual source, and P0 equals 0, not a place, but a principle, not simple, but paradoxically unified, not static, but eternally generative. It is the silent pulse beneath time, the boundless potential dwelling within absolute simplicity, the logical enigma that gives birth to reality. Understanding this foundation doesn't banish mystery, it consecrates it. It frames our existence not as a random accident, nor as a predetermined script, but as an emergent echo of a paradoxical heartbeat, a continuous unfolding within an information-based cosmos. It invites us as unknowing knowers to chart the space, this vast expanse of reality and potential, not in a futile search for final answers that may not exist, but in deep appreciation of the profound, generative questions that arise from the very foundation of being itself. Thank you for exploring the paradoxical heart of reality. This is Chiyo Natsu for the No God. Keep questioning the source. Keep charting the space.